All right, let's jump right into this. We're breaking down a really high-stakes standoff over the future of Ukraine. A new European proposal for peace has just been put on the table, but it was met with a pretty chilling warning from Moscow, one that frankly has the entire world on notice. And wow, it doesn't get much more direct than this. This warning came straight from Russian President Vladimir Putin on September 5th at the Eastern Economic Forum. It's a very clear red line, drawn in direct response to a new plan coming from the West. So, what exactly is this plan? That is the million-dollar question, right? Putin's threat didn't just come out of nowhere. It was a very specific reaction to a pretty bold new idea from some of Kyiv's most powerful allies. So, let's unpack exactly what they're proposing. Okay, our story starts in Paris. This is where European leaders got together to try and forge a totally new path forward, one they're hoping could finally secure a lasting peace in Ukraine. You had major players like French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer leading this thing. The whole point was to show that Europe can act decisively on its own. They're trying to build a really robust framework to actually enforce whatever peace deal comes next. And this isn't just a couple of countries. We're talking about a coalition of the willing that's already forming, with 26 different states having agreed, at least in principle, to this new security plan for the region. So the absolute heart of the proposal is this idea of a reassurance force. Now get this, the plan is to deploy Western troops inside Ukraine, but, and this is a huge but, only after a peace deal is officially signed. So this isn't a combat force. Think of it more like a human tripwire, designed to make any future aggression an automatic attack on the entire coalition. As you can probably guess, the idea of foreign troops on Ukrainian soil got a very swift and very unambiguous reaction from Moscow. Let's look at their official response. Yeah, Russia's rejection came from all angles. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov immediately called the plan definitely not acceptable and a direct threat to ourselves. Then President Putin took that language even further, saying Ukraine's growing military ties with the West are a root cause of the war in the first place, before dropping that legitimate target warning we started with. And President Putin himself couldn't have been more blunt. He said that if a peace deal is reached, he sees, and I quote, no sense in their presence on the territory of Ukraine, full stop. The Russian position is crystal clear. So what we have here is a fundamental clash of visions. We're looking at two completely different ideas about what a security guarantee should even look like. And this disagreement, it actually goes way back to the early days of the conflict. And this slide just lays out the divide perfectly. On the one hand, you've got the brand new Paris proposal with its reassurance force. But on the other, Russia keeps pointing back to the older Istanbul framework from 2022. That plan was totally different. It involved Ukraine becoming neutral in exchange for security guarantees from a group of nations that, crucially, included Russia itself. So what's the fundamental difference? It really all comes down to boots on the ground. So you might be asking, why are European powers pushing for something so intense? Well, from their point of view, a whole list of previous agreements were, shall we say, infringed upon by Russia in the years leading up to the invasion. That history is exactly what's fueling their demand for a more physical, on-the-ground guarantee this time around. But, of course, there's a huge complicating factor in all of this. A major player whose position is, well, decidedly unclear. And that's the United States. This whole European push is happening, in part as a reaction to American policy. With the U.S. kind of doing its own thing, pursuing its own diplomatic channels, Europe is trying to show it can act independently. But let's be real. Without full American backing, any security plan is going to face some pretty major questions. The U.S. position right now is a real mix of signals. You've got President Trump talking directly with President Putin. Meanwhile, the official line is still no U.S. troops on the ground, though there's been some talk about potential air support. What does all this add up to? Basically, Washington's commitment to this specific European plan is a massive unknown. Okay, so let's pull all these different threads together and take a look at the bigger picture. What does this incredibly complicated geopolitical chessboard actually mean for the chances of a lasting peace? It really boils down to these three key moves, doesn't it? Step 1, Europe puts a plan on the table for physical security guarantees. Step 2, Russia flat out rejects it and issues a direct threat. And step 3, all the while the United States, a critical piece of this whole puzzle, is off pursuing its own path, leaving its allies feeling pretty uncertain. And just to add one final layer of complexity to the mix, Moscow's public position is that any deal can't just be about Ukraine. President Putin has been very clear that security guarantees must also be established for Russia, which, as you can imagine, makes any potential negotiation that much more challenging. And that leaves us right here with this final, crucial question. When the world's major powers can't even agree on the most basic framework, when one side's idea of reassurance is another side's biggest threat, what does a security guarantee actually mean anymore?